Hi, this is Nate, and today we are going to be reading Chapter 67, Blowing in the Wind. Almost all of the 20th century presidents, starting with Franklin D. Roosevelt, attempted to acquire executive power beyond that described in the Constitution. Usually the claim was that national security, or war, or other emergencies made enhanced executive power necessary. Back in April 1952, the United Steelworkers demanded a raise in wages for its workers. The steel industry refused, and a steel strike was called. Harry S. Truman was fighting the Korean War. He issued an executive order directing the Secretary of Commerce to seize the steel mills to prevent the strike. The president said during a national emergency, in this case a war, the executive branch becomes supreme and does not need approval from Congress for its actions in the national interest. The steel companies were outraged. They went to court in protest. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that the president is not all-powerful, even in wartime, and that he could not seize the steel industry. In 2004, President George W. Bush claimed that he had the power to hold suspected terrorists without giving them a hearing. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor disagreed. She cited the steel seizure case. We have long since made clear that a state of war is not a blank check for the president when it comes to the rights of the nation's citizens, Justice O'Connor wrote. In 2005 and 2006, during Bush's second term as president, congressional hearings were held to examine the Bush administration's domestic surveillance, at-home spying programs. Again, the steel seizure case was cited. Again, our nation faced a thorny question. How much power and flexibility should the chief executive have in a crisis or an emergency? Before that question got answered, some fast-blowing winds made Americans focus on state and local issues. In August 2005, a hurricane formed over the Bahama Islands. Named Katrina, it moved over Florida as a moderate Category 1 hurricane, causing a few deaths and some flooding. Any hurricane means serious winds, damage, and usually floods. A Category 1 is the mildest. A Category 3 can be really bad. A Category 5 is the worst. After leaving Florida, Katrina picked up speed and strength as it traveled over unusually warm currents in the Gulf of Mexico. Roaring and blowing, it headed for a swath of land stretching from Texas to Louisiana. Katrina, still over the Gulf, became a Category 5. More than 1 million people left New Orleans in the largest mass evacuation from a major American city ever. But not everyone left. For some, there was no transportation. Others, who didn't understand the urgency, thought they could make it through the storm. A few, without radios, never realized what was coming. Looters, with criminal intent, thought they could outwit the storm. New Orleans sits in a bowl at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the Delta, stretching from the river to Big Round Lake Pontchartrain. The original city was built on a rare highland at the river's edge. As the city grew, waterways were opened to Pontchartrain to promote boat commerce. Then, in the 1940s, the state filled those waterways, and homes and buildings were put on the filled land. So down here we have a picture, and it says, the meteorological image reveals the deadly swirls of Hurricane Katrina. So moving on to the next page, further low, land got developed when large areas of marshland and swamp were drained. Meanwhile, the town's underlying water table fell drastically, so New Orleans began to sink. By 2001, 51% of the land surface in Greater New Orleans subdivisions, called parishes, was at or below sea level. Federally built levees were designed to keep the water out and the city dry, but over time there were many warnings that in a major storm the levees might not hold. Almost everyone knew they needed to be strengthened. Flooding was not unusual in parts of the city. Katrina hit Gulf Coast communities east of New Orleans early Monday, August 29th, as a Category 3 fury with sustained winds that reached 125 miles per hour, 205 kilometers per hour. At 9 a.m., The eye passed slightly to the east of New Orleans over Lake Pontchartrain. Lake water surged 15 feet above the norm, and levee walls meant to protect New Orleans weren't able to hold back Katrina's wrath. Water poured through breaks in the levees, quickly flooding the city. By late afternoon, New Orleans is dark. It has no electricity, and there is no fresh water to drink. Bodies of drowned people and animals float in what, the day before, had been city streets. Down here we have a picture. It says, "Floodwaters engulfed much of New Orleans after the historic city's defenses were breached by Hurricane Katrina." So moving on to the next page, some people have climbed onto rooftops to escape flooded homes and are calling for help. The Louisiana Superdome is an evacuation center, but Katrina has torn 2 holes in its roof, and wind and water damage make it a stinking mess. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is slow to respond to the disaster in New Orleans. Meanwhile, oil refineries, there are lots of them in Louisiana, are sloshing oily ooze into the water. They stop refining oil, which sends oil prices up around the globe. By Tuesday, floodwaters cover 80% of New Orleans, and they don't recede. Houses, shops, restaurants, and office buildings are stuck inside a deep, dirty, toxic moat. The water will stay for weeks. Now evacuation helicopters began rescuing people from rooftops and buildings. Rescuers and rowboats bang on rooftops and wait for a response. At least 1,836 people die in what is one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. It is the costliest. New Orleans in 2005 produces incredible examples of heroism and selflessness, but there is also looting and criminal disorder. Slowly, New Orleans begins to recover. Its heroes are mostly ordinary people who roll up their sleeves and help their neighbors. Downed trees, wet mattresses, destroyed homes, decayed food, and noxious mold clutter the soggy city. Before there can be any rebuilding, the debris has to be collected and bagged. From across the nation and the world, people respond to the city's tragedy with astonishing generosity. Some come to New Orleans to do what they can to help. Many communities, like Houston, open their homes and halls to Katrina's refugees. Eventually, the president approves more than $110 billion in disaster relief funds and visits the Gulf region more than a dozen times. But the slow response to Katrina becomes a public relations disaster for the administration. For those in New Orleans, it is a human and city disaster. For the nation as a whole, it is a devastating example of the cost of the bureaucratic indifference to known problems. And 4 years later, thousands of Katrina victims in Mississippi and Louisiana are still living in temporary trailers. Up here we have a picture, and it says, "The Coast Guard hoists a man to safety from the top of a vehicle in the flooded streets of New Orleans." So that was chapter 67. I hope you all have a great day.